Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Ala Tanta and I will be moderating this event. Today's discussion is about Muslim American youth and challenges they may face. I have some general questions to help guide the discussion, but feel free to jump in at any time. And for those watching on YouTube, feel free to comment if you have any questions, and inshallah we'll get to them towards the end. Before we start, can each panelist please introduce themselves?
I'll go first. Okay. Bismillah. My name is Sophia Siraj. I am from the Boston community, born and raised. I started following WIC about a year ago, just because, mashallah, WIC does a lot of good stuff. In my professional life, I work at a tech company, and then in my free time, I study with Qalam Seminary. So currently I'm a seminary student. And I also run my own nonprofit called Al Arkan.
I can go next, I guess. My name is Norman Kanani. I have been part of the Worcester community since as long as I can remember. My family immigrated to Worcester in 1992, and that's the same year I was born. So pretty much ever since then, we've been part of the community. I've gone to Al Humra Academy, Al Huda Academy, went to Shrewsbury High School, went to college not too far from here. I've studied Islam formally and informally a lot over the last few years, not as much recently. Professionally, I am a PhD student at Boston College, where I'm pursuing a degree in applied statistics and education.
You want to go, Brother Jamali, or should I?
Go ahead.
All right. Assalamu alaikum. So my name is Brother Zubair. Alhamdulillah, most of my introduction is the same as Brother Nawan's. Grew up in this community and have attended both the Islamic schools. I've had the good fortune of meeting everybody that has joined our beloved community over the past 20, 25 years. Most recently, I guess have been involved with WIC as both a youth director and an Arabic instructor. I completed an Arabic program in Dallas, Texas quite a while ago now, and have been studying Islam on and off for the past 5 years with various teachers in the Massachusetts area. Professionally, I am working in healthcare in IT.
Shall I go next? Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Muhammad Jamali. My family came here in Massachusetts, I think in about the year 98, 99. And I've lived in Worcester almost the entirety of that time. I went to Al Huda for a few years, went to high school here in Worcester, and I work as a pharmacist in Worcester.
Thank you, everyone. Now, hopefully we can start our discussion. There are many specific challenges that affect Muslim American youth more than other groups. What are some of these challenges that you guys might have noticed while growing up in the community?
I can go first, inshallah. Bismillah. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. I think that for this question of what challenges today's youth face, I'd say it boils down to two things. The first thing is I think youth today do not have role models, right? So for example, the Sahaba, radiallahu anhum, they all had the benefit of having the Prophet ﷺ around them and to kind of see a living example as to how to live. Now, we don't have the luxury of having him around, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but I think what each of us can do, especially parents, is to try and be that role model. Not necessarily perfect, but at least showing that you're trying, that you're making an effort, and then to be, humble with the youth around us. I think the other thing that we're missing too is the concept of people who serve as bridges. So everyone is kind of at their own place in life in terms of intelligence, spirituality, whatever the case may be. And I think we forget that Allah himself, right? He didn't reveal a German Quran, right? He didn't reveal, he didn't send a foreign person. He made it a point to reveal the Quran in the language that people understood, with references that they understand, excuse me, and cultural references that they understand. And I think when we think about like how to best serve as a role model, part of that is being a good bridge. So understanding what kids today are going through, empathizing with them, genuinely listening, and then from there kind of crafting what the best way to help them is.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think that relates to you guys as mentors and as youth alumni and your responsibilities for guiding the youth and being there and supporting them. Would anyone else like to talk about that?
I can jump in if no one else has anything else to say. I mean, this is a question I think that'd be nice to bounce back to the youth and see what they have to say. I've taught 8th graders at Al-Hamra Academy for the last 5-6 years. And when I first started teaching them, I was, I think, 9 years older than them. And I could still kind of relate to them to some extent. But each year that I've taught, I've felt more and more distant from your generation, to the point where I'm not on TikTok. I'm not on a lot of these social media channels that you guys are up to nowadays. So I'm not. So it's tough for us to sometimes relate to some of your challenges that you're going through. At the same time, I think a lot of the challenges that youth face are somewhat similar from generation to generation, but also I think a lot of the challenges that youth face are not entirely different from the challenges that adults face. There's this funny thing that Muslims are messaged to, is that we kind of say everyone who's from the age of 10 to 40 is considered youth, and it's funny that it's a huge age gap, but at the same time it's not entirely wrong, because our challenges are not very different. I mean, your challenges include things like peer pressure, I'm sure. Your challenges include having doubts in religion. Your challenges include so many different types of things. Opposite gender, drugs, whatever it is, and you'll be surprised maybe to know that people of my age, late 20s, early 30s, even people into the 40s, are facing the exact same challenges. It's just that at different age groups, those challenges are sometimes a little bit more difficult at certain age groups than they are at different age groups, but the challenges are nonetheless the same. So us being here, we might have somewhat conquered some of the challenges at youth, but those challenges don't go away. They come up in different ways and different sources as you get older. So I'm interested more and so hearing your perspective, what you think the unique challenges are for your particular generation, but also know that the challenges that you face are not necessarily unique to yourselves as well. So oftentimes it's easy to think, these older people don't know anything what they're talking about. They don't know what I'm going through, when in fact our challenges are not very much different.
I'm really glad you brought up that point, because like you said, I didn't think of it that way. Technically, most youth think their problems are the own youth's problems and that elders have different problems, but at the same time, they're very similar problems. For me personally, I think that the most difficult challenge that most Muslim American youth face is like balancing between their American culture and society while still trying to be a good Muslim and maintain like a healthy relationship with Allah, because there's a lot of differences between American culture and our religion, and it's sometimes difficult to balance them. So that's what I would say would be the main challenge that definitely leads to other challenges as well.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll just mention one thing, which is, so I'll just build on what you said, which was a good way to say the problem, and maybe Brother Jamali can go next, and then I'll go after that.
So touching on what you said, that a lot of the issues that youth deal with nowadays has to do with kind of being countercultural, or to what extent do we engage with the culture at large, or try to integrate ourselves to the culture at large, or assimilate, become a part of it, because there are all of these forces that pull us to want to do that. And it's natural for everyone to want to be similar to their peers. There's even one psychology experiment where people enter this elevator, and everyone turns facing away from the door of the elevator. If you guys have seen it, every single person enters this elevator and turns away from it as if it's going to open on the other side. And every single person, so there's only one person that's being tested in that scenario. And in every single scenario, that person turns with the rest of them because they don't want to be dissimilar to everyone else in that little section. So this is like a little microcosm of life. As we go through life, it takes resistance to be dissimilar to the environment around us. So the environment around us, it has many features that are indeed very countercultural to the society, to an Islamic worldview, that are very different to Islamic ethics. So when we talk about the kinds of things that appear in the media, and then you have this call from within the masajid, or this call from your parents that are pushing a certain level of modesty to you, for example, or pushing a certain ethic upon you, and then you live in a society that has completely forgone the ethic of modesty, or the accessibility of certain kind of fahisha that's available on phones, or other kinds of avenues, is really quite unprecedented. And I think even we remember how I think we remember what kinds of movies used to pass for PG-13 back in the day, and what passes for those same kinds of movies today. So the problem is that we have to live in the society and constantly go against the grain if we're going to stick to a lot of our Islamic principles. So that whole time that we're doing that, it feels like there's resistance. And so if there's resistance, eventually resistance wants to give way. So you can only sustain a level of resistance for so long. So there are certain things that help you maintain that level of resistance, but the resistance, it doesn't stop. So some of the things that help with that is having a positive peer group, having positive friends. So I think, Ala, like you mentioned, that's at the heart of the struggles that the youth are facing, that they're constantly having to kind of navigate between, my parents tell me this is what we're supposed to be doing. The masjid has this kind of rhetoric with regards to what we're supposed to be doing. But when I go to college, when I go to high school, when I go to all of these other places, when I want to engage with social media, there's this constant pull in an opposing direction. When I want to watch any kind of media, all of those things, they pull us in a direction that's opposite to what Islam is calling us to. So there's that constant resistance, and eventually resistance wants to give way. People, just like people want to follow the path of less resistance. It's what's easier to do. So I think that's, in my opinion, that's really at the heart of what's going on with a lot of the struggles that youth are facing nowadays.
All right. So just to build off of kind of what Brother Noman had said, and kind of what Sister Sophia and Brother Jamali had touched upon, I think, the first thing that we want to acknowledge, for the people that are of this age, myself, Noman, Brother Jamali, Sister Sophia, that we are on the later years of, our youth. We'd like to think we're young. We show up to the basketball park. We play like we're young. We have the heart of a lion, but I can tell you that the rest of my body doesn't act like it. And so, we come from a different a place, and I know Brother Jamali and Brother Noman really well, and mashallah, Sister Sophia goes to Qalms, which is a good institute that we all have a good relationship with, alhamdulillah. So we all come from a place of, an attempt to learn, where we're trying to go in the path of somewhat of sacrificing time and effort and energy with our families to understand a little bit maybe deeper level of Islam. And that doesn't necessarily entitle us to, give any sort of advice or lecture free willy-nilly to anybody that walks in the street. So, there's a famous saying, enjoin what is good and forbid what is evil, right? And so in the vein of that saying, Imam Suhaib had taught us at one point, that you don't necessarily go around and start yelling at every person in the street to stop what they're doing that's bad. You would go crazy and everybody would hate you, because you'd just be that guy who would be telling everybody no. But I think what we're trying to accomplish here comes from a place of an understanding of kind of dealing with the Worcester community specifically and the youth challenges over time. And something that we wanted to just share about these certain questions are not necessarily preconceived notions, but they're ideas that we have kind of studied academically and experientially within our own community here in Worcester. As we said multiple times, I think the reason for mentioning our upbringing was to show that we are born and bred and a product of our Worcester community, alhamdulillah. Both our Islamic schools, both our imams that have served, who've been here since the early days of Sheikh Hamid, onto the various imams that have come. And so, we are not necessarily youth, and that is, I think, a valid point. And so that's why Brother Noman very astutely pointed out, and he wanted to hear Sister Ala, say the concerns that she has as youth. And so we should be responding to what she's saying, just like Brother Jamali did. And so we hope, and we encourage all the youth that are listening. This is a very interesting forum because it's, you're just talking to a computer screen with a nice galaxy background. But please engage as much as you can in the comment section. Please write your questions. That is really what we want to discuss. I know Sheikh Abdul Nasser is a really, really big influence on my life, and Sister Sophia's obviously, and Brother Jamali's, where he talks about one thing that is important for any person who quote unquote thinks they're like doing youth work or wants to put themselves in the shoes of trying to give advice. You have to invest time and effort and invest emotional time with the people that you want to surround. So, like, for example, this is the last thing I'll say because I've been talking for a while, but Brother Jamali, I know one of the things we talked about very early on when we were establishing youth group was that the goal of the youth group, and this is just a general goal, is to spend time with the individual people, to have the sisters spend time with each other through those i'tikaf moments, through those pizza night moments, whatever we had. But the time that we spent was a relationship that we wanted to build, and that is an essence of what Sister Sophia was saying as well when she was talking about role models, where it takes time to invest in our youth, emotional time, not necessarily financial or a basketball tournament every 6 months or something like that. So if anybody else has anything to say, I'll stop there.
Personally, I think of the youth alumni and you guys as role models to the youth. And I'm not saying that you guys aren't part of the youth, but you guys have already experienced it. And I think that like you guys have, by sharing your experiences and your advice, that's what would benefit the youth. And I'm glad that you guys can do that. And that's what we need, because in the youth group, in the sisters youth group, we have a few youth sisters who are on the older age of the youth group, but they always show up and they always share their support and they share their experiences and they're role models to us. And we need that support. And like Sister Sophia said, they need to be there for us emotionally. Do you guys want to talk about the role of the masjid in youth's lives? What should the masjid's role be when it comes to the youth? If anyone wants to share their opinion on that.
I think just as a starting block, the masjid is going to be one of the primary places where the kinds of social groups between good families are going to be fostered before any other kind of place. You're going to definitely find that there isn't a single masjid that has a perfect environment per se, but it starts at the masajid. Because where are good people going to come together? They're going to come to the masjid. It starts at the masjid where parents are socializing with like-minded people, and in those same kinds of environments, they're going to have friends for their children that are going to be somewhat like-minded as well. So even though you could find other Muslimin in different kinds of environments, those people more likely are going to be at the masjid, listening to halaqah with you, attending an aqiqah with you, or whatever the event is. But we're taught that the masajid need to be those foundational structural blocks within a community if it's going to flourish. That's where you're going to find the best of friends. That's where the Muslimin are meant to come together in congregation to glorify Allah, to learn about their religion. All of that happens. It's like the masajid it's like the capital spaces of the Muslim community. That's where we congregate together. That's where we meet good people. And the whole point of it is that we come together in an effort to improve our community. We all come to the masjid with mistakes. We come to the masjid with a lot of flaws that we need to be working at. But it's like making fun of someone who isn't necessarily in the best shape for going to the gym. Where else are they going to be? Where else should they be besides the gym? So people are going to come with their own mistakes to the masjid, but it's where we go to improve our character, and along the way we find good friends. I know Zubair personally and Noman. Where did I meet them? From the masjid. And all of the other friends I had, at one point or another, we came together for some kind of masjid led activity.
I can go next, inshallah. Something just to give like an alternative perspective here. I personally didn't grow up in the masjid. I'm not saying that that's ideal. I mean, I think in an ideal world, people would, hang out with their kids in the masjid. Everybody would just benefit from separate programming or appropriate programming for their age and their their level. But I think there are many things we can say about what role a masjid can serve. But I think the most important one for me that I think to highlight, just based on my experience having volunteered in the masjid to the point where I was there like literally every single day of like the week, from morning to night, is it always breaks my heart whenever I see that people leave the masjid for some reason or another. And it usually has to do with the masjid not being a safe space. And I think that's something that people don't like to discuss, but I think we really need to think as a Muslim community, like what is going to help people feel like the masjid is a safe space for them, right? For example, if a sister, I remember, this is like mind blowing to me, but I remember there was one instance at a masjid that I will not name, where a sister had just converted, and I don't know, someone gave her like a scarf to wear, and she wasn't wearing it perfectly. And instead of like, normally we hug the person who's just converted, we show them love. And there was an auntie who, I mean, in her right, she was probably, she probably had good intentions, but she yanked the hijab like down on her head. And I was just like, that is not the way to welcome someone to Islam, right? Or if maybe a teen is wearing jeans, right? They get like the scathing remark from the elder in the community, which I understand people are, again, at the end of the day, I'm assuming people have good intentions and maybe they're showing their care in a certain way, but it's really, really important given how diverse the American Muslim community is diverse in terms of like backgrounds, where they grew up, the culture that the cultural baggage they're coming with, and then just again with age, we need to be very sensitive and open-minded with who we're interacting with, and really make sure that the masajid again are a safe space. Like I can't stress that enough. Like, yeah, I'll probably end it there, inshallah.
I'm glad you touched on that topic because during a lot of our youth meetings and events, a lot of sisters talk about how they don't feel welcome at the masjid when it's around other elder Muslim women because they feel like they're judging them or they don't feel welcome in the environment. And that's definitely not what we want at our mosques. We want it to be a welcoming space, and we want all people and people of all ages and backgrounds to feel comfortable and feel welcome there. Because at the end of the day, like Brother Jamali was saying, we're all going there to become better Muslims and to, have a better and stronger relationship with Allah. And the way to do that is through the masjid. So that's important, inshallah.
And what's important, another, just important thing to note, based off of what Sister Sophia said, like that, the lack of safe space being in the masjid, what happens there is that you end up causing a duality within like these children, within the youth. Putting up certain images in front of their parents, and versus another side where they're putting certain images up in front of their friends. Like you're saying, for example, people who got ostracized for wearing skinny jeans. I've been ostracized for wearing shorts to the masjid multiple times, right? For those, who come from different places like India or Pakistan or something, you get yelled at for not wearing a topi while going to the masjid. And so what ends up happening is the youth, they just become really confused. And so they don't know which side of this person, who they are. Because at school, you want to wear jeans and a t-shirt, right? You want to wear the new Air Force Ones. You want to wear what your friends are wearing. And so I think when it comes to understanding that part of that duality, I think we should give credit to the youth first and foremost, because a lot of time is spent fighting this peer pressure, especially at school, like fighting the invitations to parties. And I'm talking about doing jihad with your own self. I mean, I'm sure kids spend like half an hour thinking about how they can get to a party that their friend is at, or whether they should not go. And so we should give credit to the children that are staying within Muslim circles, that are staying within masjids, and define what that word success means for you as a parent, or as an older brother, or whatever role you have with the youth. And so we know one hadith where it talks about how if to paraphrase, basically the goal of a parent is to raise kids that make dua for them after they're gone. That's sadaqah jariyah, right? That's the best thing that your kid could do for them. And so if you've done that, is that a success? Do you want to take it a step further? But we need to meet that middle ground with our children who are going through daily struggles on every day. Like Noman was talking about, TikTok, Snapchat, all of these different platforms on your phone that none of us are in. And we don't know really what's going on. And so, it's a give and take relationship.
So how do you guys think Muslim American youth can deal with their doubts or whatever it is before they potentially lead to an identity crisis, or before they have like two different identities, one for the masjid and one for school? What can they do to deal with them?
I want to someone addressing this question while also addressing one of the questions in the comments. One of the questions in the comments from M says, "What's something important you've learned about the unique challenges that face school and college aged youth today?" And my answer to that question relates to this question, that I think when a lot of us were going to college and growing up through high school, the challenge that we were facing, the community and Muslim institutions were a bit behind in terms of how to face those challenges. Like the questions that we had, the issues we were dealing with, people weren't, it was sort of, a lot of these issues were taboo in a sense that if you brought them up, there wasn't really a forum to discuss this. The topic of like the dual identity type of thing, having doubts in faith, so many different types of questions that we have today. There are now institutions, there are discussions, forums that in which these types of ideas can be discussed freely. There's also an institute, for example, about dealing with doubt, Yaqeen Institute from Sheikh Omar Sulaiman. I mean, an institution like that, I would have never thought of, 10 years ago, let alone, the last couple of years. So we're so much more prepared as a community now to discuss these things than we ever have been before. And so the first thing that I think to remember is that you're not the only one who's dealing with these things. And going back to what I said earlier in terms of people my age and people older than me who are dealing with the same challenges that youth are facing, we have the same issue every single day at work, the idea of dual identity. When we go to the voting booth, when we're voting for, whoever we're voting for in this election, in our local elections, the decisions that we make at work, the decision of where to work in terms of, should I work at a company that I know is and behind the scenes perhaps doing something bad against ethically that conflicts with Muslim values. That's a conflict that I have within myself, with my professional world, and also within my religious world. So I don't have a direct answer to that question, but I do want to say that there are resources that we have that we never had before. You can talk about these things openly when before you couldn't have talked about them. So I do want to just acknowledge that, and I'll let Mohammed and Sophia and Zubair more directly answer that question.
I can jump in here because again, I think I offer a different perspective. I mean, I personally definitely had an identity crisis. I mean, I was born in a Muslim family, but I didn't have Islamic knowledge per se. And trust me, I went to like schools that if I were to name them now, you guys would still recognize them. And I think the gap that youth are having is that the level of knowledge or what's being delivered is not what kids need, right? So if, for example, we're constantly memorizing Quran, yes, there's a benefit in reciting Quran and memorizing Quran, right? There's many hadith that point to that. But at the end of the day, if a child still has doubts and questions and things that are unanswered, and they're not given a space to ask those questions in, that's where the doubts begin, right? If you don't have people who will encourage you to ask questions, because Islam itself encourages questions as long as they're respectful, right? I think, I don't think we're in the space. I don't think we're all going to reveal our age right now, but I would like to argue that I had pretty much the same experience that youth today have, which is, going to a school where you're like the only Muslim in your class, if not the grade, right? You're doing these things like wearing a headscarf or fasting during Ramadan when you're in a cafeteria full of people eating. You have people asking you why 9/11 happened or whatever the case may happen. And you're just sitting there like, I'm just trying to sit in math class. Like, I didn't come here to cause trouble or to do anything, right? And I think when that stuff happens, it's like the kids, and then this is my experience too. Like I remember sitting there and thinking to myself, like, why do I believe in Islam, right? And I remember also going to Google, right, and Googling like, what is Islam the right religion? And I remember, and I of course I happened to click on this kind of article, but seeing the opinion of a rabbi, a priest, and an imam, all of whom said like there's no real evidence that God exists, and I was like, okay, well, khalas, like that's done. Like I don't know if I like what's the point in praying, what's the point in fasting, right? I didn't have anyone to direct my questions to, and I think that that's not the ethos that Islam tries to facilitate for us. We are allowed to ask questions. Ibrahim alayhi salam asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a question in a respectful way, right? He was curious about how Allah revived the dead, right? So as long as you do it in a respectful way, I think like that's really what youth are missing. And I think I can also confidently say, as someone who has studied the other world religions, who has studied other philosophy, philosophers, excuse me, who has, and at the college level, I can say without any doubt in my mind that like I know for a fact that Islam is correct. And I'm saying that having also studied the other religions and faiths. So I can just, if there's a way to impart that confidence on you guys, just know that we have the right answer. We shouldn't be shy about people asking, or kids in this case, asking questions, because there is knowledge out there. If you don't have that knowledge, pass it on to someone who does, who can help and who can disseminate that knowledge.
And just to add on, like, you get those questions in math class, since you're not able to, actually take the test or do the homework you're supposed to, then you go home, you get in trouble. And so it's just like it rolls over in many different places. But yeah.
I think one thing I'd kind of like to touch upon is kind of the worldview difference that exists between our society and I guess the Islamic worldview. So there's a lot about the society that we live in that we consider to be kind of we consider it as if it has a neutral stance on religion. We think of ourselves as religious, and the society around us kind of just looks at the world neutrally. It might have some kind of biases, but we think of it as being neutral. But the thing is that every single person that we encounter has some kind of worldview. Okay? Every single person has a set of suppositions about the world that they make. And there is a dominant worldview in our society, one that is unfavorable towards religion, one that gives primacy to science, it gives primacy to kind of this material world. And that's not to say that Islam doesn't take science into consideration, but it's one that's far separated or tries to undermine religion in a variety of ways. If you've ever been in a science class within university or high school for 2 minutes, it won't be long before there will be something along the way that very explicitly will undermine religion. And it's the nature of the world around us at large. So if we're constantly living in a society that undermines our religious worldview, doubts are bound to happen. And as Sister Sophia said, there's nothing within our religion that bars us from asking questions. In fact, Allah Azza wa Jal, He tells us that the book that we have is a book that has no doubt within it. When He praises the believers, they are those who have believed, and then they did not fall into doubt. When it comes to engaging with the people who have opposing evidence to Islam, Allah says, "Hatu burhanakum." You guys bring your evidences. So it's not a case of we're scared to engage with the world around us. We're not going to be able to intellectually handle whatever doubts people throw our way. Tafaddal, like bring whatever case you have against Islam, and we can handle it accordingly. But I think the problem is, even as youth, we have this even intellectual inferiority complex, because we know so little about the deen oftentimes, that the moment the slightest thing will come our way, we weren't taught in Sunday school, or we weren't taught in Islamic school, or we weren't taught in the masjid how to deal with someone who brings up to you concepts of choice and liberty when it comes to exercising modesty. We weren't trained on how to talk about LGBT issues. We weren't explicitly taught on how to deal with atheism. All of these kinds of things, the intellectual onslaught is very serious, and it's something that needs to be addressed directly. But at the same time, the entirety of the issues that we have are not intellectual issues. Someone who falls into, doubts of Islam, that seed is not necessarily planted intellectually. If someone does not feel like praying, if someone does feel like going to that party with someone else that they want to go to, start a relationship, all of those pressures are going to weigh in on them. Desires are going to either be nurtured or kind of stagnated. So when someone really wants to make something happen, Shaitan will cause them step by footstep that you have that desire. If you undermine these components of your religion, you could give way. You wouldn't have to worry about these kinds of desires. So there's an intellectual component to the doubts that people have about Islam, but a lot of it does come from being in a kind of social group or environment that kind of facilitates coming closer to Allah rather than going farther from Him. So I think it's a mixture of both, and just to emphasize specifically the importance of having friends that are going to support you in that. The Prophet ﷺ says that the person is on the religion of their intimate friend. A person is on the religion of their intimate friend. So every person, he says, needs to be cautious of who they befriend, because we notice, the social group that you have is going to affect the kinds of vocabulary that you use. It's either going to make you more likely to become someone who lies, or more someone who's likely to use profanity or gossip with other people. It's going to affect how optimistic you are of the world around you. It's going to affect so many things about how you think about the world around you. So the Prophet ﷺ encourages us to be mindful of the kind of company that we keep, because it's going to affect us. So if we surround ourselves by people who are going to undermine our faith, or we become people who undermine the faith of others, or we are not good friends to other people, it's not that it necessarily begins as an intellectual question. It may, but more often than not, it's just trying to satisfy a lot of natural desires, and then it escalates in that fashion.
If you guys don't mind, I can just share a personal story about like this whole concept that we were talking about doubt. And no one has mentioned, like, people of our age even go through this. So hopefully something, this will be something that maybe if any of the youth we're listening to can relate to or go out to, it'll be beneficial. But over some amount of time, I'm not remembering when, basically I had a very hard time personally understanding like the Day of Judgment. I had a very hard time like wrapping my head around how it's going to work. And part of that comes from just this world. You spend so much time in planning. You think about like planning your wedding or for a child or whatever. You think about the Day of Judgment, you automatically think like, okay, what is the plan, right? Which is not the best way to think about it. But I had a very hard time understanding like how we would be, raised from the dead and so on and so forth. And it came to a point where like there was a physical pain associated with thinking about those concepts. I had asked a few teachers and gotten some advice, and it really just wasn't going away. I really couldn't understand it. And so I remember one day in Ramadan, I was really deeply, deeply thinking about it and affected. And one of the things that COVID had allowed for was, alhamdulillah, a lot of people got to spend their Ramadans in their house and study the Quran a little bit more. And so that night, the day I was thinking about in Ramadan, there was a verse recited where basically the translation was that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created you, then he'll have no problem resurrecting you. And at that moment, it was like all of those thoughts had just gone away. And so the point I want to just reiterate that Brother Jamali and Sister Sophia had mentioned multiple times is doubts are there and can happen. It is okay to ask questions, but it is also incumbent upon us to go and try to seek those answers. And you may not find it the first time, you may not find it the second time, but it is you will find it eventually, and Allah will give it to you.
I can just I had a similar experience. I mean, we don't end up on panels like this, or because we never went through a time when there was doubt there. That was a component of the beginning of my journey too. That it just hit me like a wall to the face one day. That am I Muslim because my parents are Muslim, or because I truly believe this on my own? And at one point or another, every single person has to have an answer to that question themselves. So whether you're confronted with it because of an engagement with friends at school, or because you're in a certain class, or because you see something on TV, at one point or another, you have to have a way in which you develop an intrinsic connection to this deen. So like Zubair mentioned, having a connection to the Quran, having some kind of method in which you are studying the religion, so that you're looking for those answers within the Islamic paradigm.
I just want to add on to what Mohammed is saying. I think also is all recognizing that some of the questions that people have regarding doubt and identity, or these are complicated issues, and I don't think anyone should expect to find like a one paragraph answer to your question online. These are things that Mohammed was talking a little bit about, how the worldview around us is so much different. We've kind of been brainwashed in a sense growing up to think in a certain paradigm, a way of thinking, when in reality there are different ways of thinking about issues, particularly from an Islamic viewpoint. And so sometimes it takes learning that Islamic viewpoint before you're prepared to really know the answer to that question. So just because, if you Googled something a couple of times, you didn't find a satisfactory answer, the reality is that these are things that are not easy to explain in a short essay. And so it does take time. And again, I mentioned that there are some resources out there that do very diligently in detail take upon these issues. And we can maybe include some of these in the comments. But also that you should also feel free to reach out to Imam Asif. And I was mentioning earlier is that these used to be taboo issues. And if you brought them up, oftentimes you wouldn't get satisfactory answers, and people would kind of shy away from really detailing your answers, giving you due diligence to your answers. But now Imam Asif can tell you himself that he probably gets these questions every single day. And so feel free to ask him these questions, and don't feel like you're going to be judged because you have these questions. Because in fact, a lot of us have these questions, and a lot of us continue to have these questions as we get older. They don't necessarily go away. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you for sharing all your thoughts, everyone. And I hope that anyone who's watching has benefited from this discussion. So if you have any more questions that you want to ask the panelists, or if you guys want to share any advice for the youth or the parents, you guys can add that, and you guys, people watching, can comment down below. And we can start with the questions that we already have. So we have one from Brother Nawal. The negative influences don't necessarily come from schools, colleges, or other places. The masjid is always a place where negative influences exist. Unfortunately, some really bad kids show up at the masjid and influence others. So how can we deal with this?
I think this is a really great question and definitely one that I hear a lot. So part of what I do with my nonprofit is I actually teach kids. So I teach maybe like 40 kids throughout the year in a number of different areas. And a lot of the kids that are coming to my program versus other programs are coming with the complaint, with actually that exact same complaint of, you know, when I bring my child to the masjid, there may be this person or that person that, you know, I wasn't aware of that was doing XYZ, and now my child is also doing XYZ. So I think now let's just acknowledge that this is a really good concern. It shows that you as a parent care about your child and you want to make sure that they're surrounded by good company, obviously, because we all know that company is very important in ultimately kind of affecting what your character as a child is going to be. What I also would say is we also should be, it is good to be conscious and to be careful, but we should also be careful as to what language we're using with when we're describing other kids, right? And I'm kind of giving a curveball answer here because I think this is important, is when we describe other people who may not be doing favorable or good things, or in our opinion, we should hate the action, not the person themselves, right? Because that kid actually may be better than your kid, and you have no idea. They might be more, you know, obedient to their parents at home. They may, you know, volunteer somewhere that you're not seeing. So, I mean, sometimes it's hard because all we can see is what we see, and you know, maybe there was that one bad moment that we caught that child in, but it's really important that we as a community don't impart on kids or youth or honestly anyone around us, even as adults, that we don't impart that that behavior of don't like stay away from that person because they're bad, right? Or it's a child, right? The child may not know any better, or may not have had the opportunities that your child has had. And in that case, I would say encourage your child that if they're seeing, you know, their peers around them doing bad things, empower them to be that good friend if they have the strength and the knowledge to do so. If they're not able to do so, then teach them ways that they can, you know, gently and nicely bow out from that situation, right? So if you hear, for example, your friend saying a bad word, teach your child to, you know, remind their friends, hey guys, you shouldn't be saying that, right? And if they start to make fun of your child, then say, you know, then encourage your child to know when to walk away without necessarily feeling bad that maybe their friends around them are teasing them for whatever reason, right? So I think there's a lot more to the situation than just dismissing people as bad or good, because at the end of the day, only Allah knows where people stand.
Thank you for that answer, Sister Sophia.
And a lot of the times, that parent has no idea what their child is doing. So someone who thinks that their child is being negatively influenced by someone else, their child may be sharing that one site to the other child, because it's not like anyone is able to have their child grow up in a bubble. Every single person is giving some level of access to the internet. If they're on the internet, they have the ability to access the most vile things imaginable. So I know of instances where people from very good families with positive upbringings within Islamic schools come to the masajid, and they still manage to share some content that would make all of us very worried. But I can guarantee you their children would have their parents would have no idea that content is being shared. So and what's more, I'll even add that sometimes when this kind of stuff is mentioned on the minbars, that, you know, stay away from some of the vile things on the internet, for example, I know parents that get upset that that's even mentioned, because they'll say you're bringing undue attention to that. And I've asked the parent before, at what age would you talk to your child about these things? And they said probably like 13, 14. And I think all of us would know that 3, 4, 5 years before that, they've already had access to those things on their own before their parents have even thought to address these topics directly with them. So definitely not having this kind of mentality of shifting blame towards someone else, because we have to have some husn al-dhan, especially when it comes to other children that are at the masjid. And it can always be our child that's the one that's being a negative influence to someone else.
And I just very quickly want to add that, growing up, unfortunately, I've seen it personally. I don't know if you guys have, but like a racial component even gets added to it, where unfortunately you have like a masjid with Desis, Arabs, and people from Somalia, etc. And you have the Desi uncles who are yelling at the Somali kids because they're making a mess or something like that, versus Desi kids who are doing the exact same thing. And that's completely wrong. Like Brother Jamali and Sister Sophia have mentioned multiple times. I mean, these kids up to a certain age they're pure. They have more fitra in them, and they're connected more to their fitra than probably any of us, considering they haven't been started to be accounted for. And so, unfortunately, that racial bias needs to be taken away as well, where certain kids who, seemingly maybe poor or are of a different race shouldn't get yelled at or treated differently or labeled the bad kids versus, some other race because they're of the same type.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to be moving on to the next comment. So it says, the youth shouldn't be wasting time on endless halaqas at the masjid. Rather, they should focus on their education and sports and spending time with their family. The only Islamic focus at that age should be the 5 pillars. What are your thoughts on this comment?
I think it's hard to prescribe like a one answer solution for every child. Every child is different, right? So I think while it is important to start off with the basics, because you definitely don't want to overwhelm your child, it's very possible that you may have a child who, maybe does have good memory and could easily memorize the Quran. So why not, nurture that gift? Or you may have another child who, is really curious about how Islam compares to other religions or ideologies, because not necessarily because they're trying to impress you, but because they're trying to survive at school, right? So I think every child is different, and I think it's kind of the role of the parent and anybody else who cares about this child to help figure out what the best resources and opportunities are to present to them. Because I'm telling you, you'd be surprised. I feel like, on the one hand, the person asking this question is correct, right? Islam doesn't teach us to sit in the masjid all day and read the Quran, right? That's not practical. We learn, general concepts that should be applied everywhere, right? Like ihsan, if you're going to do something, do it with excellence. So it could be that child is, doing their ihsan by, hanging out with their family, or, excelling in that sport that they're good at. But I think regardless of what it is that you end up deciding for your child or helping decide for your child, please make sure that somewhere in there is the basics of Islam. And it can be the 5 pillars, sure, but it also we should also think of their Islamic education as, again, the role models around them. It's just, like the Prophet ﷺ wasn't a person who just gave lectures from the minbar. He lived it every single day. Like no one could accuse him of hypocrisy or not walking the talk, right? So it's my answer is to say that, again, every child is different, and I think sure, the basics are fine, but don't be afraid to nurture a gift if a child has one.
That's a great answer. And I wanted to add to that in saying that I think one of the problems that our community made, if we think about the Muslim American community as happening phases, right? You can think about the early 1900 movements with the African American movements in Islam as one sort of phase from like the early 1900s to the 1960s. Then you can kind of think of a post-immigrant movement in Islam. And I think the fault of the post-immigrant movement, people from like my parents' background, is that all they did was focus on the 5 pillars. So I kind of have a sort of a contrary view to this, while also recognizing that every child needs to be dealt with differently. But I think when we oversimplify the faith as well, when we make it only about the 5 pillars, that's when religion, I feel, can become very irrelevant for kids. That's when these doubts start to show, because they think Islam is just a set of actions that you do and there isn't anything at the heart of it. So I think it really depends on the type of halakas that you're attending as well at the masjid. If those halakas are reinforcing the idea that Islam is irrelevant for the child, then that's a bad thing. But if those halakas, and I can, if somebody like Muhammad Jamali is giving it, or if Sister Sophia is giving a talk at the masjid, given just these few minutes of hearing her talk, Imam Asif, I can tell you their perspectives are going to be a lot more enlightening than just talking about the 5 pillars. And I think that is really important for kids to also understand that Islam is much more than that too. And when Islam becomes more than just the 5 pillars and it becomes part of everything that you do in life, then religion becomes much more fulfilling. Then the reason why we practice religion becomes a lot more fulfilling. The happiness that comes with being attached to religion becomes a lot more obvious to the person. So I think that can be somewhat of a dangerous idea to have, that all kids need is the 5 pillars. Because I talk to 8th graders all the time who feel like, okay, I've learned the 5 pillars for the last 9 years. What else is there to Islam? If there isn't anything else, then what am I doing? This doesn't seem to make any sense to me. So there's, going back to what Sister Sophia was saying, there's a balance that needs to be, that we need to come to. It can't just be sports, education, 5 pillars, and that's it. That's one extreme, I think. And the other extreme is just doing Islam and nothing else. There's got to always be a balance that we have to strive. And of course, every kid's different. And what that balance looks like for every kid is going to be somewhat different too.
I would just like to add, so definitely focusing on sports, focusing on very robust familial relationships is very important. I think no youth is going to be at harm because of having invested in those things. I do want to say though that I think because of our entertainment culture, one of the things that's happened is we've tried to apply that to the masjid framework. So we have to make masjid programming be entertaining. It has to be this novel kind of idea. It has to offer novel content. It has to have a basketball game before, after. There needs to be some kind of movie. It needs to be like this fireworks spectacle for me to even try to attempt to bring this young boy or girl to the masjid, because that's the attention span people have, or that's the kind of content that they're used to consuming. And I think with some time, as much as I've loved having a basketball court at the masjid, I think it may have slipped beneath a lot of us that what we've done is we've associated the masjid as having to be a place that also comes with some level of entertainment for us to find value in it. That there needs to be some kind of basketball game, there needs to be some really cool program for me to go in there and just worship Allah, for me to attend the ritual prayer, for me to attend salah. And I think constantly looking at the masjid as this place that has to offer that kind of content, it will always leave us searching for more out of the masjid. The masjid is there to be the place where you go to worship Allah. So even though while parents might be bringing their kids to the khutbah, for example, and they realize that their kid didn't retain much, and years down the line, those kids probably didn't remember much from those khutbah. But what they will remember is that they woke up on Friday morning, they took a shower on Friday morning, their parents ironed for them their nice clothes to go to the masjid, and they went there because it was an event. That, you know, this is something that we do as Muslimin. We have our certain rituals that give us some sort of structure, because Allah Azza wa Jal does want us to come to Him with some level of structure that He has prescribed for us. That the salah is a level of structure that is prescribed for us. That there are all of these things that Allah Azza wa Jal has made for us that aren't necessarily going to be like a dose of entertainment, but they're still going to be very beneficial for us to engage in. So I think having that mindset where the masjid has to be this thing that's really entertaining, where the programming has to be really entertaining, instead of just looking at it and saying like, what can I learn from this? Or, you know, there are going to be themes that are going to be reiterated and it might be a little bit boring, but there's a lot that's being done just by being in the environment of the masjid, just by committing to those sets of rituals. They have their own intrinsic value.
I'm just going to throw a curveball here because I think I agree with parts of that answer, but I think there are other parts where maybe I would just offer a bit of a different opinion. So I think in terms of when we use the word entertaining, I think definitely one extreme is, you know, your child sees the masjid as one big playground where everyone's running around in laps doing tawaf for some reason. I don't know why. That's one extreme, right? You don't want your kids to do that. I think what's important is in terms of entertainment, whatever that may be, the way I would define entertainment or having to be entertaining is, I mean, prior to where I am right now, working at a tech company, I also taught for a few years. I mean, I'm still a teacher now, part-time, but I also taught 4th through 8th grade. And something that I noticed that with my students was, yes, kids need to be entertained, but more in the sense that like you're speaking their language. And that goes to the point earlier I was trying to make of being a bridge is at the end of the day, any dry topic, quote unquote dry topic, can be made or presented in such a way where it's still respectful, it's still being delivered without compromising, you know, the Islamic manners that we're supposed to impart, but still be, again, entertaining for the kid. An example being, I taught a Prophet series class this summer for kids. And I literally did like no advertising. I just said, it's free. We'll have it for open for kids. If you want to come, you can come. I literally had 40 kids consistently wake up on a Sunday morning, attend that class. Okay, 40, and it's like I didn't do anything special. All I did was I added GIFs to my presentation, right? I kept it short. And then some of the GIFs were from shows or things that they recognized. I didn't do, you know, I didn't throw in, you know, haram GIFs or inappropriate GIFs or anything, but I think just that touch, or even, for example, you know, pausing in between my slides to ask them questions to reflect, that for them can be entertaining because I don't care what your child says, everyone, Allah put like in ourselves that we're always going to have that hole or that that gap that can only be fulfilled through finding Him and having the answers that Islam provides. So I'm just a minor touch to your answer, inshallah. But I think that on the one hand, we can be entertaining in a way that, again, is still like Islamically appropriate. And as far as how we view the masjid itself, the companions themselves didn't always just pray in the masjid. They did other things as well in the masjid, right? They had events, they hung out. I think the more important thing is, okay, we can hang out and chat in the masjid or the musalla, but when it's prayer time, what are you going to do? Right? Because now that's the adab that you have towards Allah. The call to prayer is happening. Let's all role model that Allah has called us to prayer and go stand up and pray. Right? So I'm saying this because I don't want the masjid to just become some dry, sterile place where there's no life. And then the masajid, the leaders of the masajid are like, where are all the kids? Well, you don't allow anything else to happen other than, you know, reciting Quran. So, you know, so I'll leave it at that, inshallah.
Jazakallah khairan to all of the panelists and for everyone who was watching. Inshallah, we're just going to end with a quick dua by Brother Jamali.
Cool.
That's what I was told. That's what I was told. Sorry.
It's news to me. Jazakallah khair. I ask Allah Azza wa Jalla that He enables us to be useful people to our community, that He makes us hudat and muhtadin, people who are sources of guidance for other people and guided in and of themselves. We ask Allah, who is the guide, to show us what is true as true and enable us to follow it, show us what is false as false and enable us to stay away from it. We ask Allah that He makes us bridges to the youth, that He enable us to comfort the stranger as they come to the masjid, enable them to feel comforted through the community of the masjid, that He makes our masajid places that are those safe spaces, places of learning, places of flourishment, places where certainty in His religion and His Prophet are fostered. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal that He makes us our hearts firm upon His religion. We ask Allah that He makes us our hearts firm on His religion. We ask Allah that He makes our hearts firm on His religion. We ask Allah that He enable us to call to His way with good words, with wisdom, and that which is most beloved to Him. And I ask Allah Azza wa Jal that He forgive us all of our sins. Any mistakes that were said today is from ourselves and from shaitan, and whatever was correct is from Allah Azza wa Jal. هذا وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا.